Bob Tuskin is an eternal student of economics, science, and the arts. His radio career began at the age of 15. With 9/11 as a backup, his activist side began to emerge. An organic gardener, a radio show host, and an activist, Bob seeks a higher form of wisdom and works hard to ensure a better place for his children's children. Seeking an end to the current slavery-based system in which we live, his solutions-based understanding is an important asset. As an activist, and with the skills of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, referred to as the trivium, in hand, Tuskin often speaks in front of city commissions, the Environmental Protection Agency, and other institutions in the pursuit of 9/11 justice, and to promote awareness of geoengineering and other topics. Bob will also be running for his local sheriff's office. Never afraid to speak his mind, with Bob Tuskin, the truth shall be told. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Tuskin.
All right. All right, thanks so much for having me. I decided to get my talk divided into 3 parts. The first part is a prerequisite, and that's understanding how we learn, understanding knowledge. And my friend Jan Irvin and colleague will be talking a lot about the trivium, so I'm not going to get too into it, but I want you to all understand how important it is. It allows you to see through the lies that the mainstream media puts upon us and so forth. So that's going to be the first part of my talk. Let's see here. Wisdom and logic. There you go. The second part of my talk will be on the dark. And because I'm a talk show host, I talk about a lot of different things. So I may, say some things that you're already familiar with and go a little bit here and there and everywhere. But we'll talk about the dark and the mind control and fear. Of course, fear being a major part of the dark and the control mechanism. And then, of course, we'll end it with solutions and the light, which is an absolutely crucial thing to look at. And you can't talk about the dark without looking at the light. It's essential that we all become activists. And, as my introduction mentioned, I am a local activist. I do this not because I want to do this, but because there's a need to do this kind of thing. I do my radio show 5 days a week on Oracle Broadcasting, Monday through Friday, with no compensation other than knowing that this is something that we have to do in these serious times that we're living in. So again, I may mention a lot of different things, go here and there, just try to stay with me. But it's important that you don't take anything that I say for granted. I encourage everyone to become an autodidact. And an autodidact, very simply put, is a self-taught person. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily you have to teach yourself. We learn from others, and we gather information, and we do this kind of thing. And it's important not to be, egotistical and that kind of thing, but a self-taught person looks into something for himself. He doesn't take anything for granted. He doesn't allow the programming to tell him what to think. He thinks about it for himself, which is an important concept that I'll start my talk off with. And, of course, Robert Anton Wilson, a lot of you are familiar with him, great writer. He talks about this, and he says, very simply, I do not believe anything. Now, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but the point is, and I'll quote from his book, The Cosmic Trigger, a wonderful read if you haven't checked it out yet. He says, I do not believe anything. This remark was made in these very words by John Gribben, a physics editor and New Scientist for New Scientist magazine, in a BBC TV debate with Malcolm Muggeridge, and it provoked incredibility on the part of most viewers. It seems to be a hangover of the medieval Catholic era that causes most people, even the educated, to think that everybody must believe something. And that if one is not a theist, one must be a dogmatic atheist. And if one does not think capitalism is perfect, one must believe fervently in socialism. And if one does not have blind faith in X, one must alternatively have no blind faith in not X or the reverse of X. And this is the gist of it. My opinion is that belief is the death of intelligence. As soon as one believes a doctrine of any sort or assumes certitude, one stops thinking about that aspect of existence. So he considers himself to be an agnostic thinker, which is important for all of us to look at things in that way. And again, Robert Anton Wilson, along with a lot of people, preach this sort of thing. Mark just mentioned in his talk, the importance of keeping an open mind. Aristotle says it best when he says it's the mark of an educated mind to entertain a thought without accepting it. Socrates says, as far as for me, all I know is that I know nothing. And, that's an important thing for people to understand, that we're all learning. None of us, just because I'm up here talking doesn't mean I'm any different than any of you. I'm learning, and this is a learning process. Now, to keep an open mind, it's important that you understand that an open mind without the proper tools is a programmable mind, okay? So if you allow things to come into your mind and you just accept them on the face value, then you're essentially allowing yourself to be programmed. So it's important that you keep an open mind with the proper tools. And those tools can be found with the trivium, critical thinking, and that sort of thing. Which takes me to the next part of my talk. Wisdom and logic. Here we go. The trivium. Again, Jan Irvin's going to go into great length into this, and he's been a mentor to me along with a lot of great thinkers. And it's really helped me have the confidence, because with the skills of the trivium, you can look at any issue, and it's like a razor blade, because you can see where things don't match up, where things don't make sense. The trivium consists of 3 parts: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar answers the questions of who, what, where, and when. Logic answers the questions of why. And rhetoric provides the how of a subject. In simple terms, it's knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Let's take a first look at the first part of the trivium, which is grammar. Grammar is important. Discovering and ordering facts of reality comprises basic systematic knowledge. So that's the base, that's the start. And we have to come to understanding of definition of certain words. We have to understand what these terms mean in order to use them. Makes sense, right? The next part is one of the most important aspects of this, and that's logic. And the study of logic answers the question of why, developing the faculty of reason in establishing valid, i.e. non-contradictory, relationships among facts yields basic systematic understanding. And let's take a look at some of the logical fallacies, which is not all of logic, but it's a big portion of it. And I think that, some of these I'm sure you'll be familiar with, and we face them all the time. Logical fallacies are a big part of the lies. And if you recognize the logical fallacies, you'll be able to see through the programming. The first logical fallacy that I like to cover is the fallacy of appeal to authority. And we get this all the time, whether it's the fluoride issue where they say, well, the dentists say fluoride is good for you, so then it has to be good for you because the dentist says that it's good for you. Person A is claimed to be an authority on the subject S, and therefore, let me back up here. Person A is claimed to be an authority on subject S. Person A makes claim C about subject S. Therefore, C is true. So because I'm a talk radio host, I can tell you everything that you want to know about doing a talk show. You're not buying it. Because I am a dentist, I'm going to tell you fluoride is good for you. Because of that, never mind the subject unto itself, never mind discussing the actual chemical properties of fluoride, never mind any of that, just because I'm an expert, okay? This is essential to understand. and is a big fallacy that we face all the time. The other fallacy that I wanted to bring up, I have three of them I'm going to go over, is the fallacy of appeal to belief, which essentially we covered with the first portion of the talk here. Appeal to belief is a fallacy that has this general pattern. Most people believe that a claim X is true. Therefore, X is true. I dealt with this recently when I confronted Penn and Teller, and you guys can all see this on YouTube. I basically asked them, they do a show called Bullshit, and they're great bullshitters, so it's a fitting title. And I asked them some simple questions. I said, have you watched the footage of Building 7 and so on? And sure enough, he answered no, and then went on his Twitter account and started talking all sorts of trash about me and saying that, there was some 9/11 truther, okay, and we'll get into ad hominem fallacies in just a second, the name calling that automatically discredits you because you're a conspiracy theorist or whatnot. But anyways, long story short, I was amongst my peers at the University of Florida, and I was booed, okay, by my peers, and they started to chant, "Tase him, tase him, tase him," the home of the tasing incident, of course, University of Florida. So I told my mother about this and my parents, who are victims of the mind control, in my opinion, in many respects. I love them nonetheless, of course. And I told this to my mom and my dad, and they said, well, if they were booing you, you must have been doing something wrong. Yeah, if the crowd was against it, well, then you must have been wrong. So that is the fallacy of appeal to belief. Most people believe that 9/11 was done by guys with box cutters. Therefore, because most people believe that, well, it must be true. I know you all see through that. Last but not least, ad hominem fallacies. The most often used fallacy, in my opinion. And the translation of ad hominem from Latin to English, ad hominem, means against the man or against the person. To go after the messenger rather than the subject unto itself, which is important. And I get that all the time. Well, you are a conspiracy theorist, therefore I do not care to look at the chemical properties of whatever. Or you are a conspiracy theorist, therefore I do not care to look at the evidence that you're presenting to me that these aerosol sprays are actually bad for you. Never mind the testing, the scientific testing and that sort of thing. You're a conspiracy theorist. I'm sure you guys all get my point. We see this all the time. And in the mainstream media, we see them constantly use ad hominem fallacies. You'll notice that that is one of the fallback positions of the mainstream media. Constant ad hominem attacks. Again, we need to understand this stuff so that it's not used to program us. I study philosophy, and philosophy, in short, means the love of wisdom. And the last part of the trivium is rhetoric, which essentially refers to the idea of wisdom. Now, as far as wisdom's concerned in rhetoric, rhetoric provides the how of a subject, and applying knowledge and understanding expressively comprises wisdom, or in other words, it is a systematically usable knowledge and understanding. Martin Luther King says it best. There comes a point where when we learn about this stuff, it's not just enough to know about it internally and to hold that within. If you see this stuff, it's important that we become teachers, that we move to that stage of giving back as an activist. And Martin Luther King says that, let's see if I can get the slide here, there comes a time when silence is betrayal. So all of you have a responsibility in many respects to take what you learn and to not bottle it up, to actually do something with it. Now, not everyone's a talk show host, not everyone's an activist, a lecturer, or whatever, but it's important that you find your niche, and whatever that may be, you guys know in your hearts what that is. So again, there comes a time when silence becomes betrayal. That time is right now. So I encourage all of you to no longer keep silent, whether it's on the bus or at the store. Say something. I constantly put up into the sky. I said, do you see what they're spraying? I ask questions too, because that's important. You want people to think for themselves and ask these questions internally and come to this process to themselves. And because otherwise you sound preachy and it goes downhill. All right, let's now move to the section of my talk that I titled The Darkness. The darkness promotes ignorance to keep you from the light. But before we can see the light, we must become aware of the darkness. This is a tough thing for a lot of people because we want to be in a positive vibration. We want to think positively. We want to come to everything from a place of love. And unconditional love is a misunderstood concept because it allows people to take a critical look at things. And it doesn't always have to be positive unconditional love. You can have a negative reaction to something, and because you're coming from a place of love, because you want to see that move to a positive vibration, you recognize the darkness. Sai Baba was asked, "Can't you see the darkness?" He's kind of got hair like me a little bit. Not quite. And he responded, and I thought this was great, so I'll just quote him verbatim. "Yes, I see it, but I don't identify myself with it. I'm not afraid of it. How can I fear darkness if I see such clear light? Of course I understand those who fear, because I also have been standing where I could only see the evil. This is why now I feel love for all of that. Darkness is not a force contrary to the light. It is absence of light. You cannot invade the light without darkness. That is not how the principle of light works." He goes on to say, "Fear, drama, injustice, hate, and sadness only exist in states of darkness because you can't see the global context in which your life develops. And the only way to see from the light when you are there is through faith. Once you have increased your vibration and frequency, state of consciousness, you will be able to see towards darkness and understand what you have lived." He was also asked, "How can you say this is there? How can you say this if there is more evil in the world every day?" Interesting question. There is not more evil. There is more light. And that is what I'm talking about on this message. Imagine that you have a room or warehouse where for years you have been storing your things and is lit by a 40-watt bulb. Change the bulb to 100-watt and you'll see what happens. You'll see the mess and the dust that you didn't think existed. The dirt will be clear. This is what is happening, and this makes possible that a lot of people are reading this without thinking of it as foolish like it could have been years ago. Right here, folks, when we talk about satanic ritualistic abuse, when we talk about the occult systems, the agenda, we're shedding light. And we're seeing the dust now. And that's okay. We have to come to terms with that. So it's important that we understand the darkness and that we don't shy away from it and never act Pollyannish. And in many respects, that is what I do as an activist. I shed light to the dark. And that is a tough thing. People ask me all the time, don't you ever get burnt out because you're dealing with this stuff all the time? And I don't, because I don't deal with the negative stuff from a place of negativity. I deal with it from a place of love. As long as you're going about it, don't worry about the fact that this makes us feel uneasy, because once it makes us feel uneasy, it then motivates us to make the next step. And that's important. Now, as I began my awakening, if you will, and there's no necessary process of awakening, and it never stops, I came across all sorts of hurdles. My family, my friends, as I'm sure a lot of you have as well, and it's difficult, and you reach a point where you feel like you're all alone. I'm sure a lot of you have that feeling. Am I the only one seeing this stuff? Am I the only one? And then you reach out to a community of like-minded thinkers, and you realize that other people are getting this stuff as well. Fear. That's the next part here. Fear. You can use it as a motivator. Fear is not all bad. Fear can provide you, and this isn't the fear I'm talking about from a scary movie or a roller coaster, not that type of fear. This is the type of fear that is a healthy fear, that motivates you to get out of a dangerous situation. Your synaptic response kicks in, and this sort of fear is healthy. We need to have fear of chemicals in our food and water supply. I mean, these are all rational fears. Now, the other type of fear that they want you to obsess about are unrational fears. But we have to understand fear can motivate us. Now, when you come across fear, fear can be a good thing, because if you, and let me get to my next slide here so I can, there's the fear slide. And there's the bear. Okay, now, here's the example I'm going to give you. Fear of this bear is a good thing, and I'll tell you why. If you come up to this bear and you say, "Oh, bear, don't worry, I love you. You know, my law of attraction is putting out vibes of love," doesn't care. Doesn't care. So that is a healthy fear, and I feel like the bear is a symbol for this deep, satanic, occult, whatever you want to call it, whether it's reptiles or whatever, it doesn't matter. This is just a symbol, and we have to recognize this threat and use that to motivate us to go beyond. The systems of control are also essential to look at. Let's see here. It starts off before you're even in the womb. The mothers are introduced to all sorts of toxins. They're introduced to stress that's unnecessary for the pregnancy. You know, the food they eat, the medicines they give mothers. From the time of birth, you're already under the pressures of the darkness. You're already under the pressures of the system. And then when you're born, the first thing they do, if you're a boy, or one of the first things they do, is a form of trauma-based mind control. It's mutilation of the genitals. This mutilation, in my opinion, is the initiation for boys. And people say, well, they don't remember it, and so on. Well, they may not remember it, but that physical trauma remains in the brain as a footprint for the rest of the child's life. And when you're mutilating a newborn boy or girls in some countries, what that does is that creates this initial schism in the brain, that initial rush of adrenaline, that fight or flight response. And you constantly stay in that state, in a sense, for the rest of your life. That is the initiation, if you will, okay? And in the West, we circumcise things because it's healthy. Well, I'd like to debunk that rumor. I have plenty of friends all around the world, and proper hygiene takes care of that issue. So, you know, I don't want to get too much into the debate of circumcision, but I wanted to make the point that that is one of the first initiations to this. And we can look at the occult and whatnot, and I urge you all to look into this and a little bit deeper and think for yourselves. Then, what's next? Well, then they give vaccination to the kids, you know. So we circumcise, vaccinate, and so on. So right when you're born, you're already being put into this darkness. You're born in a state of light and already being manipulated and conditioned in darkness. Because all of us as children don't necessarily come into this earth as inherently evil. This is a process of conditioning and mind control, and this is a big part of the fear. The next step is going to school. They give the kids, you know, they put them in the school bus, and they tell them what to think, and they program children with the TV shows and Walt Disney, and Freeman's going to do great talk, or he has done great talks on that. And there's all these little things that they're programming kids. And then our education system, of course, is a big part of that, the compulsory education system. And I applaud anyone here who goes beyond that and homeschools or whatever. I think that's a great idea, to not subject your kids to mind control. It was put best, many of you by now have heard the talk that Erica Goldson gave as valedictorian. What an amazing talk she gave. And I'm going to quote a good portion of the talk here to illustrate some of the things that I find to be wrong with our education system as well. There's Erica Goldson giving her valedictorian talk, and here she is, top of her class. And she gives a talk called Here I Stand. This is the story of a young but earnest Zen student who approached his teacher and asked the master, "If I work very hard and diligently, how long will it take for me to find Zen?" The master thought about this, then replied, 10 years. The student then said, "But what if I work very, very hard and really apply myself to learn fast? How long then?" Replied the master, "Well, 20 years. "But if I really, really work at it, how long then?" asked the student. 30 years, replied the master. "But I don't understand," said the disappointed student. "At each time that I say I will work harder, you say it will take me longer." "Why do you say that?" replied the master. "When you have one eye on the goal, you have one eye on the path." This is the dilemma that she faced with the American education system. We are so focused on a goal, whether it's passing a test or graduating as first in the class. However, in this way, we do not really learn. We do whatever it takes to achieve our original objective. Some of you may be thinking, quote, "Well, if you pass a test or become valedictorian, didn't you learn something?" she says. Well, yes, you learned something, but not all that you could have. Perhaps you only learned how to memorize names, places, and dates to later on forget in order to clear your mind for the test or for the next test. School is not all that it can be. Right now, it is a place for most people to determine that their goal is to get out as soon as possible. Get me out of here. I can empathize with that. I am now accomplishing that goal. I am graduating. I should look at this as a positive experience, especially being at the top of my class. However, in retrospect, I cannot say that I am any more intelligent than my peers. I can attest that I am only the best at doing what I am told and working the system. Yet here I stand, and I am supposed to be proud that I have completed this period of indoctrination. I will leave in the fall to go on to the next phase expected of me in order to receive a paper document that certifies that I am capable of work. But I contest that I am a human being, a thinker, an adventurer, not a worker. A worker is someone who is trapped within repetition, a slave of the system set up before him. But now I have successfully shown that I was the best slave. I did what I was told to the extreme, while others sat in class and doodled to later become great artists. I sat in class to take notes and become a great test taker. While others would come to class without their homework done because they were reading about an interest of theirs, I never missed an assignment. While others were creating music and writing lyrics, I decided to do extra credit even though I didn't even need it. So I wonder, why did I even want this position? Sure, I earned it, and she's referring to her valedictorian award. But what will come of it when I leave the educational institutionalism? Will I be successful or forever lost? I have no clue about what I want to do with my life. I have no interest because I saw every subject of study as work, and I excelled at every subject just for the purpose of excelling. And quite frankly, now I am scared, she says. John Taylor Gatto. You guys know who he is? Great teacher, great, amazing person. She quotes him. He's a retired school teacher and activist critical of compulsory schooling. And he asserts, "We could encourage the best qualities of youthfulness, curiosity, adventure, resilience, the capacity for surprising insight, simply by being more flexible at time, text, and test, by introducing kids into truly competent adults, and by giving each student what autonomy he or she needs in order to take a risk every now and then." But we don't do that. Between these cinder block walls, we are expected to be the same. We are trained to ace every standardized test, and those who deviate and see light through a different lens are worthless to the scheme of public education and therefore viewed with contempt. H.L. Mencken wrote in the American Mercury for April 1924 that the aim of public education is not to fill the young of the species with knowledge and awaken their intelligence. Nothing could be further from the truth. The aim is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level to breed and train and standardize a standardized citizen, to put down dissident and originality. That is the aim of the United States. To illustrate this idea, doesn't it perturb you to learn about the idea of critical thinking? Is there really such a thing as uncritically thinking? To think is to process information in order to form an opinion. But if we are not critical when processing this information, are we really thinking, or are we mindlessly accepting their opinions? We are more the robotic bookshelves conditioned to blurt out facts we are taught in school. We are all very special. Every human on this planet is so special. So aren't we all deserving of something better, of using our minds for innovation rather than memorization, for creativity rather than futile activity, for rumination rather than stagnation? We are not here to get a degree, to get a job, so we can consume industry-approved placation after placation. This is more and there is more and more still. Simply put, we're human beings. We're not a number, as they say in the show Prisoners. Yeah. Thank you. And to keep us in this box is the reason why we have so many people out there that can't see beyond the lies of 9/11 or whatever it may be. They've been conditioned in a system. So we have to understand that a lot of these people that we alienate, that we call sheeple or whatever, they're victims of this system. And we have to come to them from a perspective of love. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't confront them with these topics, again, because we have to confront people with these topics. We have to make people aware of the dark. Moving on with the dark, the next part of the dark, and this is a major focus of mine, is all the toxins in our food and water and air. I can go on in great length about this subject matter, and I'll reiterate some of the essential toxins that I've come across, whether it's high fructose corn syrup that was shown to have mercury, trace elements of mercury in addition to other products, GMO corn being heavily used in the production of high fructose corn syrup, fluoride, enough said, right guys? We face now radiation, whether it's going through, I had to fly to come here, and it was my first opportunity to get to see the full body scanners. And sure enough, people were lining up. You had the choice, from what I understand, to go through the regular detection or to go through this enhanced security. And people were lining up like cattle to go into the enhanced security, and even the people that went through the regular metal detectors were going like this as they walked through. And the guy was telling them, don't put your hands up, and they're just going through the process, These are the same cattle being led to slaughter. So, again, toxins. We can't trust the EPA to tell us what's going on. I don't know if you guys heard, we covered this on the show last week. They wanted to raise the levels of radiation so that the considered safe levels of radiation were elevated. Well, it turns out no levels of radiation are safe. Come on, I mean, this is Our EPA that we're dealing with, now to go back and contradict myself here a little bit, the EPA on a local level, I suggest all of you work with. I met with my local EPA in regards to the aerosol operations and the chemtrail issue, and they were actually very open to this. We presented them a nonpartisan, non-conspiracy, if you will, point of view of just the data, the test from rainwater and that kind of thing. And the local EPA was receptive to this. Now, whether or not we'll see anything come to fruition with them is another story. So the EPA is not just an organization on the federal level. There's local EPA offices in every county around the country. So I urge you all to look into those local EPA officials and work with them, educate them on the various toxins that they're not informing the public about. On a local level, you're more likely to succeed than dealing with the national EPA. And of course, every single county's EPA is not in on a conspiracy to poison us all with toxins. So you have to understand that there are a lot of good people out there, and we're quick to provide a label. Oh, EPA, they're a bunch of liars. Let's not work with them. Well, let's work with them up until the point that they're backing us up. The next toxin that I'd like to talk about, and this is a big one that people seem to forget, BPAs, plastics. And we got all those wonderful water donated to us, and at least we're drinking, hopefully, fluoride-free water. But the BPAs are an absolutely devastating thing to our health, our neuro pathways and whatnot. And BPAs are found in just about anything. I've been reading the labels religiously now since I've become aware and looking at the number of plastic that has on various products. And a lot of it is not BPA free. So all of these toxins, again, are part of the dark. Because when people are not physically healthy, of course mentally they're not going to see through the lies because they're not physically well. Our mind and body are connected. And let us not forget the Hippocratic Oath. Let your food be your medicine and your medicine be your food. It's that simple. What we put in our bodies, the old saying, we are what we eat. Well, in a way, that's true. And not literally, of course, but in a way, that's true. Because what we put in our bodies provides us the fuel to think through things critically and to look at the various control mechanisms without having to be sick all the time. When you're sick and you're not feeling well, of course you're not going to be at your highest point of intellect. Of course you're not going to be able to see things. So you're more susceptible to programming in the dark. Moving right along past the toxins, like I said, a lot of this stuff you guys already know about. I don't want to go into too much length about any of these toxins, and I'm sure I'm missing quite a bit. Aspartame, we've had Dr. Betty Martini on the show many times to talk about aspartame. Told my parents about it. My dad's very concerned about heart disease. His mother died when he was very young of a heart attack, and sure enough, a study came out. Well, aspartame is, in diet sodas is what they said. Aspartame, of course, being the major chemical in diet sodas. Aspartame causes heart disease. Well, I still got to drink my Diet Coke, though, when I go out to dinner, so, forget that my mother died. So, anyways, another personal situation. The next part of the control in the dark is money. Or as Mark breaks it down, what is it, one eye? One eye. Again, the symbolism behind this stuff continues to repeat itself. And believe it or not, what you're looking at right now on the screen, that's money. You recognize it? Now, it's not a Federal Reserve note that we're used to looking, which is not money, and we'll get into it, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that as well. It was the original form of money. It was an extension of the barter system. Essentially, all our money system is a means of barter. It's a token to represent the bartering exchange, and it's based on the scarcity principle. I only have this many oranges, so I can only trade this many oranges for that many apples. And you have more apples, therefore, because I only have few oranges, for how many apples you have, to trade one apple, I'll get 5 oranges. That's what it comes down to. It's that simple. That's our distribution system controlled by scarcity-based tokens. There's money again in its more recent form. And of course, the Federal Reserve notes a debt-based system of control. And that's a big part of this because we need to keep people in a state of scarcity. Scarcity is an essential tool that the elite use to control people with. And scarcity creates fear. And then fear, of course, creates people to be susceptible to things that they wouldn't necessarily have accepted if they weren't in a state of fear. Okay, this is an important graph that I wanted to share with you guys. What we're looking at is the point in history, and let me switch mics here briefly so I can step out. Hello? All right. Hello? Yeah, I'm on. I'm live. Okay, here we go. This is a chart of human energy versus mechanical energy. And this is, the red is human energy, and the blue, mechanical energy. And employment, man hours. So, and the black, of course, physical production. So right at the point where human energy, or slaves essentially, became obsolete, and mechanical energy surpassed human energy, in other words, we reached the point in time where we had the Industrial Revolution, and we had the steamboat, and then next thing you know, we had other ways to power our farm equipment, and we had the ability to produce what normally took 5 million human beings' physical labor. We had the ability to produce that with one machine. So 5 million men replaced by one machine. So when people talk about unemployment, they're not getting the full picture. Now, at this point in history where mechanical energy surpassed the efficiency of human labor, if you look on the chart here, 1919. The same year the Federal Reserve was created. Okay? So at that same point in history, they needed to continue the control mechanisms of scarcity. So what did they do? They created a system of debt, a system of fractional reserve banking. Okay? And Edward Bernays, of course, right along that same time, when people were only buying stuff for the sake of its function, you know, buying a coat, not because it made them look pretty, but because it kept them warm. Edward Bernays figured out that we needed to get people to buy more and to buy into this system of debt. And he was a big part of that continuing control of people with his propaganda, which he changed the name to PR, or public relations, because propaganda after World War I, I believe, had a negative connotation to it. So let's change it to public relations, because that sounds better, right? Well, we see through this conditioning at the Free Your Mind Conference, and it's essential that we understand how the scarcity-based aspects of our monetary system keep us in a state of control. And this is what scarcity does to you. Pavlov did a test with chickens. He provided the chickens with an abundance of food and water, so whenever they were hungry, they'd go to the feeder and there would always be plenty of food and water. Well, he realized after observing their behaviors under constant abundance, as opposed to what he then introduced to the chickens, that their behaviors, you know, they acted normal, and he observed that for some time. Well, anyways, he said, well, let's tweak with the constant abundance of food and water and introduce scarcity, and take some food away, give them some food back, and so on. Well, guess what? That changed their behaviors. Only then did they start to hoard. Only then did they start to steal from one another. Only then did they become greedy and all these behaviors that we see human beings face. This is what happens. that is under scarcity. So we had chickens, and then that's what happens. Okay? And human beings are affected by the same sort of scarcity-based mind control, as I put it. It's the feeling of not having enough. It's the feeling, and ultimately our lives are all scarce, at least in this physical body. And because of that, you'll notice that the mainstream media and the controllers focus a lot on the fact that you're going to die. You know, we're going to die, we're going to die. The fear of death, the fear of scarcity of our lifespan. That's how the terrorist threat works, because we're afraid we're going to die from terrorists. All these things are, again, scarcity-based mind control. All right, in a response to this change, the organization Technocracy in 1919 established an idea of post-scarcity economics. Jacques Fresco, now of the Venus Project, was a member of Technocracy and learned of the ideas of a system beyond scarcity. Now, this system didn't operate on a carrot and stick approach like our current system operates. There wasn't a distribution of wealth in the sense that you have one pie and each individual gets an exactly even slice of pie. That still is under the condition of scarcity. So you only, rather than having only one pie, you have unlimited pies, okay? And this might be a bit naive under the current context of our system, because we have to imagine that even though our physical reality allows for us to have abundance, and we see abundance in nature, we see that God provides or whatever, even though this is the physical and the natural reality of things, we have to understand that we're in a system that remains in constant scarcity and fear. So it's important that we deal with the current context of our system before we deal within the confines of our system before we get Pollyannish and look to these sorts of things. So I focus on how I can seek abundance in my own life, okay, and not be dependent on the scarcity-based systems of control. And this is going to take me to the next portion of my talk. And by the way, it's important when we're dealing with any situation to be here now, as Ram Dass puts it in his famous book. You know, we have to deal with the situation as it is now. All right, the best part of my talk, I think. The solutions, love, light, all this good stuff. And that's what I'm all about. You know, there came a point in time where, you know, you just have to focus on solutions. Because otherwise, if you don't focus on solutions, you're a part of the problem. And solutions come in many different forms. And the best form of a solution, in my mind, is, again, to take yourself off of the dependency of the scarcity-based system of control. And how do you do that? Well, you get control of your food first. Food and water, of course, are essential, but let's start with food. How do you get control of your food supply? Not everyone can grow a garden. Not everyone has the land to do that. And a lot of people think that, you know, the collapse is going to happen in one day. Well, I have these seeds that I got from my survival seed stock, and I'm going to be able to grow a garden. Well, that requires a lot of practice and a lot of efforts, and it requires some forethought. So get in the practice now, while you still can, of learning how to garden and supplementing your food so that you're not dependent on going to the grocery store. Take baby steps. It's important that, you know, we understand that this is not an instantaneous process. Before I had learned to grow gardens, I stocked up on food, you know, which is good to do in conjunction with growing a garden. I bought 150 pounds of brown rice and lentils and that kind of thing recently. And it's good to stock up on food because then, again, if something happens, you're not dependent. You're not dependent on the systems of control. I mean, look what people did on Black Friday, or traditionally do on Black Friday. I don't know, many of you may have seen this video where they show people trampling over each other like animals, just because of a $200 laptop or whatever electronic they may have wanted. That, again, scarcity-based mind control. Because there's only this much for this amount of price, we have to trample each other like animals for laptops. Well, imagine what they're going to do when they're hungry. Hunger is one of the best motivators of any revolution. It really is. And only when people are hungry will we see the rest of the masses start to realize what's going on. Because when they're hungry and their bellies are not full, then we see them starting to turn around. And of course, water and food go hand in hand. And how do we get dependent, or how do we not be dependent on our water supply? And that's difficult. And in order to grow food, you need to have access to water. And I collect rainwater in my garden. I have an extensive rainwater collection system, and it goes into 2 very large tanks. And these tanks then are connected to a solar pump, and they irrigate the garden. Well, it turns out they're trying to make collecting rainwater illegal. I don't know if you heard about this. It's crazy. Yeah. And so they're trying to make us, again, dependent on the systems of control, on the water supply. And of course, we need clean water, and that's becoming more and more scarce as well. So of course, water is a big part of this, and we need not underestimate the importance of water. I don't know if you guys know about this, but in Iraq, a lot of people talk about the need to go into Iraq and these different conflicts because of oil, because Iraq has a large supply of oil. Well, people don't realize that Iraq actually has the largest freshwater aquifer in the Middle East. In addition to that, guess who else has water? It's been in the news lately. You got it. There you go. So we talk about Libya's oil, but what about water? Again, you can live without oil, but you can't live without water. And our bodies are made of 70% water. It's, essential concept to look at. And sure enough, the Bush family and all these folks, they're buying property where there's water. In Paraguay, there's a large aquifer underneath the property that the Bush family just invested in. So they get it. And then we see the privatization of water. And there's a lot of great documentaries on this subject matter. FLOW, which is an acronym, For the Love of Water. It talks about the international corporations controlling water. I can go on in great length about the subject of water, and that's a talk into itself. So I think many of you are aware of how important water is. And then, of course, energy. And who's this guy? Yeah, it's Nikola Tesla. And, he's just one of many examples of the idea that being stuck on the dependency of a scarcity-based system, being hooked up into the grid, limits ourselves. It limits the ability, and we have the ability 100% to have free energy. Now, what is free energy? Well, it just means it's in abundance, in constant abundance, that we all can have as much access to it as we want without plenishing the earth's blood or oil or whatever. So it's important that we get off the dependency of our electric system, and the best way I found to do that was to get off the grid. And that brings me to the next portion of my talk, and again, not an easy thing, and I'm no longer off the grid, and I'll explain why in just a second. I decided about 2.5 years ago now that I was going to take a sabbatical and live off the grid in the middle of nowhere. That's where I moved to, in the Baja Peninsula, a very remote location, beach, beautiful as you can see. We received water from the mountains. It was in constant abundance from a stream in the mountain. It was drinkable water. So don't buy the propaganda in Mexico that all water is bad. Of course, I wouldn't suggest drinking it in the cities. But anyways, the water came down and filled up, again, 2 tanks that were connected. Same thing in the garden I had there, to an irrigation system. And I lived off the grid. I lived pretty much dependent on the food that I would grow. Of course, I supplemented that with maybe picking up some olive oil at the store, some dried goods and that kind of thing. And I lived this. I went by myself without a community, which is one of the reasons why I came back, because human beings are social creatures. We do need communities. And I think that for me to go out there solo was a bit naive. But nonetheless, I went out to Mexico, and that was my little shack that I had. I had an outdoor kitchen. I lived in that tiny trailer that was already out there. I made use of it. It had a bed and a roof over my head. That's all I needed. Okay, and I had access to the ocean. I had access to $1 million view, and paid absolutely nothing to stay there. It came to fruition because of some friends that were like-minded, and of course, one thing leads to another, and it's all these synchronicities are starting to happen. I don't know if they're synchronicities or it's just this paradigm shift occurring, and we see all these things starting to line up. Anyways, I moved out there, and then that was the property. There's another shot from the front side. There was, again, nothing out there. Absolutely nothing out there. But you know what? I was happy. I was not dependent on going to the store. I wasn't dependent on the system. I wasn't going to be threatened because I had planted 30 fruit trees there. I had the water supply coming in abundance. I could live off the land, essentially. And there's me in my trailer, happy as can be. I realized at a certain point that I was being selfish. here I am, aware of all the darkness, aware of the fact that the rest of the world is essentially headed towards chaos. And here I am wasting away in paradise with $1 million view, eating my food, living life, you know, learning. I had books out there. I did whatever I want. But I wasn't able to be an activist. I was confined within my own existence. So there came to a certain point where I felt I was being selfish. I said, you know, I need to, because I'm aware of these things, going back to the third part of the trivium and the quote, Martin Luther King quote, you know, I realized that for me to do this is selfish and it's not the right thing. So I had to go beyond that, and I came back and tapped in and continued my radio show. And since then I've been recharged as an activist. And someday we'll all come, everyone in this room, and we'll move to Mexico together. And we'll do it. So the idea, again, to get away from the darkness, to get away from the fear, we have to move to the light. In closing, I'm sorry I don't have time for questions, but any of you, feel free to approach me at any point. Stay in touch with my radio show. Email me, whatever you like. In closing, let me see if I can get to the end of my notes here. Here's a few things that I wanted to express throughout the talk that I hope you'll take home with you. Learning how to learn is an essential key to illuminate the dark. Facing the dark is essential and you should not be afraid of that. Becoming aware of the dark should motivate you and not depress you. Taking the power from the controllers is essential and baby steps. Integrity. The word integrity comes from two words. The first part, integer, or wholeness, and it's important that we have integrity, that we have wholeness. The divide and conquer that we talk about is not just divide and conquer amongst individual versus individuals. It's also divide and conquer amongst ourselves, split between our own selves. So we have to come to terms with ourself and allow yourself to face these things, knowing that you remain the same and that these things can't control you no matter what. And again, the skills of the trivium and the skills of understanding the dark will help you stay intact and give you the self-confidence that you need. All right, I'm just about out of time here, so I didn't come up with any fancy catchphrase to end the talk on a high note. Let's see here. Entheogens? I didn't mention entheogens. I'll end the talk with a quick talk about entheogens. Entheogens are essential. They're another tool, and they're a tool that must be used under intense caution, okay, and under intense care. And they are just one of those things that help shake people up, to get them out of their ego-based consciousness and help them move to a place of love. Whatever it may be, whether it's meditation or an entheogen or whatnot, to help you get to that state, I hope you all join me there, and I'm sure many of the people in this room today have already joined me there. And I thank you all, and thanks so much for allowing me to share this with you.